So it is an extraordinary pleasure first to be the president of this phenomenal institution, Hunter College, and particularly to welcome you to this very special evening where we not only celebrate the publication of Peter Carey's new novel and Tom Sleigh's new collection of poetry, Station Z, but we celebrate the work of these two extraordinary literary giants at Hunter College, the people who made this wonderful program possible. Our own Tom Sleigh's long list of honors includes the John Updike Award, the Poetry Society of America's Shelley Award, the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, which we particularly liked here at Hunter College because it came with $100,000, which is probably more than we've been paying Tom. When Tom was given the John Updike Award in 2011, one of the judges, J.D. McClatchy, said, "All those things we'd rather not hear about: war, disease, physical and moral corruption, the nightmare family, the beauty and heartbreak of love, we hear about in the poems, plays, and essays of Tom Sleigh. The wonder of his work is that no matter the subject, the writing is singular, finished, and even when unbearable, impossible to ignore. In the midst of the mess we have made of this world, his voice is calm, measured, intelligent, and at times even playful. He is becoming our Jonathan Swift." Tom's exceedingly dangerous travels in Lebanon, Somalia, Iraq, Iran, and Libya became the basis for the new poetry collection which we celebrate tonight, Station Z, which has been touted as his best of his 9 books to date. And our own Tom is sweet. He is deeply and widely read, but he is also fearless. One can't think of the many Toms, even if one shouldn't, even in this, quote, short changes of a great poem, in the last line of his magnificent Homage to Mary Hamilton. Last night there were 4 Toms. Today there'll be but 3. There was Tom Fool, Sweet Tooth Tom, Tom the Bomb, and me. There is Gentle Tom, our friend, Wise Tom, our teacher, our scholar, our distinguished professor. There is Genius Tom, beloved by our great poets, Heaney and Levine. As for Tom the Bomb, we'd rather he stayed home safe in Brooklyn for a while. Okay, now Peter wrote that. So we can take a quiz whether Peter should keep his day job. And I am certainly going to keep mine. And of course, we celebrate our own extraordinary leader, Peter Carey. It has now been, Peter, over a decade that you have made Hunter your home, and how lucky, how amazing for a public college to have such a treasure. You all know, and you can go to the Wikipedia site, there's so many awards that there's actually a specific chart of Peter Carey's awards. My favorite is when he was awarded the Order of Australia. Actually, my real favorite was when they made a stamp of Peter. There's something particularly, I guess that's something I just think is particularly impressive, Peter, to be on a stamp. Of course, what no man can, well, very few men have done to win not 1 but 2 Booker Prizes. But for all that, Peter's colleagues will tell you that he never utters words of self-praise. He excels in one-man downship, rather, as opposed to one-upmanship. He carries that modesty to his work with his students, with whom he never plays that distinguished man of letters routine. Is there any wonder then, with Peter at the helm and Tom with his support, that there are hundreds and hundreds of students vying to be part of this incredible program, a place where you can get a truly priceless degree at a price that we're lucky our students can afford. So tonight, to Peter, to Tom, we celebrate your new works, but mostly we celebrate you and what you have contributed to this extraordinary institution. On behalf of our students and the successful alums that you've sent out into the world, God bless and thank you.
The old ham comes out. I just want to thank Jennifer Robb. There's only one reason why this program works, and that is because of Jennifer, because of her vision and her drive and her understanding of what it takes, and also because, you know, she had the imagination to actually give this program the kind of support that it needs. And I just want to applaud her now. And I'm also just delighted to be here. There are so many terrific writers in the audience tonight. There's my dear friend Peter, who I'm going to be reading with. And then there are all the people whom I work with. There's that old Yeats quote, which goes, "Think where our glory most begins and ends, and say that my glory was I had such friends." And then my old friend Seamus Heaney, a couple years before a year before he died, he said, "And Tom, I also have the corollary." And I said, "What is the corollary, Seamus?" He says, "Well, think where our glory most begins and ends, and say that my trouble was I had such friends." So. But there's no trouble. It's all pleasure. And the last thing I'll say is Colin McCann and I were teaching last night, and we came out of our classrooms with that kind of adrenaline high of having been in touch with people who deigned to let us sit there and, talk at them. And I said to Colin, almost simultaneously, he said to me, I said, "I love my students." And he said to me, "I love my students too." And it was an unscripted moment. So I really do love my students, and it's ridiculous to call them such. They're extraordinarily accomplished artists already, and they kind of bear with us. So thank you guys, because that is what makes this whole program possible. So without further ado, thank you. I'm going to read, I always want to start with a new poem in order to, keep it honest. And then I'll finish with a new poem, because there may be people here who have heard the poems in the middle. So that means those people can listen to the first one, wake up for the last one. So the last thing I want to say is that I'm deeply grateful to have Fiona McCrae, my publisher here. She's an amazing person. I've known her for a long time, and she believes in the basic values of literature beyond all else. So thank you, Fiona. Yeah. First poem is called "What the Dog Really Says." And we all know that when a dog looks at you, and then it looks at the door, and then it looks back at you, that is a kind of language, right? And you might call it I-age. So, and there's a moment in this poem which has a kind of Lassie come home moment, in which there was a dog who, a friend of mine, was ill and dying, and the dog stayed next to him and lay under his bed for 3 days without moving. Very strange. But anyway, what the dog really says. It wasn't language, but I-age, the dog spoke, looking at the door, then at me, then at the door. Its eyes signaling something more than what Chekhov said the dog smelled in each corner of the room, the unquestioned superiority of human beings. Nor was it what Nietzsche thought when he wrote that a dog comes up to the philosopher as if to ask a question, but then forgets the question. For there was no question when the dog licked the hand. There was a smell of a kind that the dog must have known so well from when the hand took it out for walks and the dog plunged its nose into frozen meat of a dead gull on a day so cold only the faintest microbial whiffs of rot could thread their way up the dog's nostrils and knot and unknot in its brain. What the dog really says is that if a dog could talk, we couldn't understand it. And so the dog moves in harmony of nose to smell, claws clicking on the sidewalk as it marks with a squirt of piss this tree, that fence post, the laminar overlays of scent like pages leafed through in a diary, in which each entry keeps changing in a present that has no future, but only a fading past. For 3 days and nights, the dog didn't move from under the bed, where the man whose hand it licked for the salts on the hand, the subtly changing salts, lay unmoving. But why did the dog keep lying there? Once the body was zipped away into a body bag, wrestled onto a gurney, as the undertaker, unshaven in a rumpled white shirt with maybe gravy stains on the collar, his black slacks and jacket fitting a little too tight, tried to make the dog move until the dog showed its teeth and began to bark. What's in the dog-hearted, dog-brained dog's heart? And why should we say that a dog is afraid his master will beat him today, but not that a dog is afraid his master will beat him tomorrow? The salts on the man's hand, did they smell and taste of what a dog smells and tastes when it rolls on its back in half-rotten flesh and comes running with that odor wafting from its matted down fur toward the hand that feeds it and that it licks? Things to be eaten, smelled, sat upon, run away from. Things that die but don't make a dog fearful. The way dogs bark in the dwindling languages. Bow wow, bloff bloff, how how, gong gong, tiav tiav. What does the dog know of this? Its features scrunching up into a puggish, wrinkled, I'm worried, shouldn't you be, face? Thank you. Here's a poem, a matrimonial greeting, I guess you could call it. Matrimony tends to play out over a long period of time, doesn't it? Stairway. In those days, so many stairways were said to lead to happiness, mainly of a sexual kind. And as I climbed those stairs, I could hear my name being called from the top, as I so often did back then. And the sight of me bolting up the stairs with my eager cartoon tongue hanging out wasn't as sad or silly as it might seem. Naturally, there were the avatars of sex, the ones who claimed to hate it, the others who thought it led to universal harmony. They were out in front of the rest of us, and they believed it, and so did I. But as a friend recently said to me, always having to lead the way, be in front of the troops, all those speeches and sermons and truths you'd have to tell, such a burden. It went on like this, stairway branching into stairway, endless others going up or down to meetings, just as I was. And after many years, there we were, to find you, to hold you, led like steps up and down. The sadness and silliness, though just as sad and silly, were somehow more in earnest. Even my dog instincts, strong as always, understood some reckoning was at hand. The two of us had decided, mutually and irrevocably, to start climbing a stair that we knew was partly ruined, unlit except by the capriciousness of moonlight. But we had a method, and until the day when one or both of us stumbled off into the nothingness below, we committed ourselves to it. When one said, left, we turned left, which meant, because I have a terrible sense of direction, that I went whichever way you went. So I'm going to end the domestic world with this one, Second Sight, I have a daughter who's not really my daughter. She's not my biological daughter, and we never know what to call each other. And so we've come up with the term ad. I'm her ad. And she's my ad, which means almost daughter and almost dad. Second sight. In my fantasy of fatherhood, in which I'm your real father, not just the almost dad arriving through random channels of divorce, you and I don't lie to one another, shrugging each other off when words get the best of us, but coming full circle with wan smiles. When you hole up inside yourself, headphones and computer screen taking you away, I want to feel in 10 years that if I'm still alive, you'll still look at me with that same wary expectancy, your surreptitious, cool-eyed appraisal, debating if my love for you is real. Am I destined to be those shark-faced waves that my death will one day make you enter? You and your mother make such a self-sufficient pair. In thrift stores, looking for your prom dress, what father could stand up to your unsparing eyes, gauging with such erotic calculation your figure in the mirror? Back of it all, when I indulge my second sight, all I see are dead zones. No grandchildren, no evenings at the beach, no bonfires in a future that allows one glass of wine per shot of insulin. Will we both agree that I love you always, no matter my love's flawed, aging, partiality? My occupation now is to help you be alone. Okay, I'm going to shift gears now, so we're going to leave Brooklyn and the domestic world. And as Jennifer said, a lot of these poems come out of journalism that I've done, and I'm not going to go on and on about that. But I've written a lot of journalism about refugee issues, mainly Palestinian refugees and Somali refugees. And I've been to Lebanon and Syria. I've been to East Africa, Mogadishu, Somalia, and been in refugee camps in those places. And then I was in Iraq last December, and I was in Libya in March. And in each one of those places I find, kind of extraordinary people. And anyway, I was in Lebanon in 2007, just after the war, 2006-2007 war, and there was a World Cup going on. And Zinedine Zidane, the famous ethnic Algerian French player, headbutted one of the Italian players. And the reason why he headbutted the Italian player was because the Italian player apparently insulted his sister and his ethnic origin. So I guess you could say he had it coming. Anyway, the whole country was coming apart. There was a mini civil war going on, and at the same time, there was the joy of the World Cup. What could be better? It's like soccer is this kind of humanist dream of cross-cultural, everybody loves soccer. And I guess this poem sort of takes that and looks at it, wishes it were true. The poem takes place in Beirut. Homage to Zidane. In all the cafes on the seafront, whatever could be seen kept exploding in riots of blue, red, green. Horns everywhere, hooting for the ball soaring toward the net. Slicks of trash and plastic glinting from the waves. The world was in a fever to see the perfect goal. Giant screens on every corner, loud with the locust thrum of satellite hookups. Between two limestone cliffs, I plunged into the filth, sucked a mouthful of oil, and set out swimming hard to where I heard rising voices shouting in Arabic, "Score, score." A big wave swept me under, another and another, until I shot out of the water that gleamed like a forehead, budding mine, expert but without malice, threatening to drag me down until I slid out on the rocks. I shivered and wanted to live in the clear light of the announcers' voices, echoing in different languages, weaving a net so fine the sun could pass through it. Yet you could see an instant replay, the ball caught and caught and caught, and not one stitch of that fabric going taut. This poem is called Hunger, and I was in Mogadishu and in Kenya during a famine. About 250,000 people died. Anyway, this poem uses, I was at a feeding station, and there was a child who was completely sacked out, and then they gave the child this nutritional biscuit called Plumpy Nut, and the child ate a few bites and totally came back to life. And there was a very shiny wrapper around the biscuit, and the child began to throw the wrapper up in the air, playing with it. It was like instinct to play recovered it immediately as soon as they had enough calories. So the poem uses these three terms from the Egyptian Book of the Dead: Ak, which is the realm of light; a Ba, which is a human-headed bird, which is kind of our idea of the soul; and then the Ba, in order to get to this realm of light, has to cross to this realm of darkness called Dwat, and it can get lost there forever because there are demons there are monsters, and it seemed to me a pretty interesting metaphor for the life of a refugee. Hunger. In places where I am, and he isn't, in places where he is and I'm not, if he survived, if his baby teeth have grown past rudiments of mouthing, now he bites and chews, his will driven by craving for what might be there and might not in the food sacks that, if you put your head in them, smell not at all, as if the grain weren't real or made of molecules extraterrestrial, a substance never seen on earth before, a substance that in the huge warehouse rises in a pyramid, grains stacked into a mock Pharaoh's tomb. So if a human-headed bird with an infant's face should fly up in green-winged splendor, sprouting from bony shoulder blades and feathering his neck muscles so exhausted they minutely tremble, unable to hold his head upright for more than a few seconds, wouldn't it be hard, almost impossible, for his winged Ba to dissolve into Ak, where his molecules bend into beams of light? And so he stays in Dwat, nothing transfigured, as in this moment. To get a better look at me, steel turtle head in flak jacket, he cocks his head almost like a bird's, his sidelong famine gawk as he lies listless in his mother's lap, coming back into focus when the woman from Médecins Sans Frontières gives him Plumpy Nut that needs no water, no refrigeration, no preparation, a food suited to eternity, so that body becoming ba may eat to enter ak, unless you're shut out, unless you live forever in your death in Dwat, condemned forever to eat this peanut slurry as a biscuit that he chews and chews. But when he's finished, he begins throwing the silver wrapper in the air, catching it and throwing it, fluttering in the air. The silver wrapper turning the air between him and his mother into a medium, another other world nobody but them can share, just as long as the calories, the sugars, the digestive juices feed that silver, never ending, in the moment, momentary fluttering. I'll just read two more. This poem is called Homage to Basho, and Basho was a 17th century Japanese poet who would take these trips through Japan, and he would write travelogue punctuated by poems. So, I decided, well, it's not exactly scenic, Iraq, but it's, that's what I did. So I'll read this poem is quite long, so I'm going to read just a few short sections from it. What I have to say about my trip meanders the way the Tigris and Euphrates meander, and like those rivers in flood, is sometimes murky in intention, balked in its conclusions, and flows where it has to flow. In Iraq, in which the customs and conventions were often operating invisibly or easily misinterpreted to be the same as mine, I suppose I gave up on telling a straightforward story. Instead, one night in a helicopter, what I felt in the air, so different from what was happening on the ground, made me realize that when you take an oath to tell the truth, you're not telling that truth either to the judge or to the courtroom. Perhaps the point of the oath is to try to surround yourself with a lightness and solitude from which you can speak the truth, adding whatever light and shade you can so as to make the how implicate the why. After all, the judge and the members of the court weren't riding in the helicopter. So a realistic description won't mean anything to anyone unless you add that light and shade which only you, as the witness, could perceive. But even then, in the helicopter roar, the truth may be hard to hear, even in your own ears. It's all right. Thank you. I'm not Brian Williams. Just want to let you know that. And I'll read a section to prove that. I proved myself to be inept at putting on my bulletproof vest, attaching this to that in all the wrong places, before figuring out how to Velcro the waist panels tightly around my stomach so that they were under the vest, not over it, and adjusting and readjusting the shoulder straps to make sure they were tight. I didn't look very military. In fact, I looked like I was wearing a bib, a sort of Rambo Jr. Now that I was strapped into my vest, it felt fairly lightweight, around 8 pounds, thick enough, according to the specs, to give reasonable protection against handguns. But when you consider that a bullet fired from a military-style weapon is the equivalent of a 5-pound sledgehammer smashing into at 45 miles per hour, serious bruising and broken ribs are pretty much guaranteed. I put on my helmet and snapped the chin snap fast, but I had to keep pushing it back from sliding down over my eyes. Rather than protected, I looked and felt like an overgrown infant. In front of our armored vehicle, a Chevy Suburban SUV reinforced with steel plating, a beefy but terminally polite security contractor dressed in khakis, a brown knit shirt, a gray windbreaker, lightweight hikers, and sporting a buzz cut, gave us a briefing. Once you're inside the vehicle, please stay away from the doors. We'll let you in and out. If we take fire, or if I give you the signal to get down, I'd appreciate it if you could get on the bottom of the vehicle. I'll climb in back with you and cover you. Once we get to our destination, you can leave your armor and helmets in the vehicle. Then we'll open the doors and we'll proceed single file to our destination. Everything clear? Car cover. The car cover blown halfway off the car, billows and bags sagging back to a slack void before being blown wide open, almost as if a man and woman, or a woman and her soldier wrestled over and over, amorous and or murderous in the cold wind, the weak Christmas Day sun lighting in stark shadow, the shredded plastic bags billowing in leafless branches, above what keeps billowing below, a duet singing watts above to watts below, sky and earth concentrating all their powers on what could be 3 or 4 or countless small wars, rolling over the earth's surface the way the canvas rolls in the animating wind. The corners at war with the center they want to tear free of, the center tugging and yanking at the corners. But it's all just a piece of canvas sewn to fit over roof and windshield and hug bumper and headlights, so ingeniously tailored that even this small skill rebukes me for my seeing in its roiling sullen gas flares breaking out all over the earth, and the security contractors who are paid to keep me safe wearing their in-ear radio receivers, hearing what's going on out there as we move in the armored suburban among the lucky and the doomed until one or the other or both lie still as the car cover going slack over the skin of the abandoned car. And one thing we did was we did workshops all over the country because we'd been invited by Iraqi writers and professors and Iraqi students. And English is an immensely popular major over there, and about 3,000 majors alone at the University of Basra. So we did these writing workshops with them, and they'd never done that before. And we did a very simple exercise. We'd say, I remember, and for each time they would just remember something from their childhood. That's where we started. And at a certain point in the exercise, I would say, now I want you to change it. And I want you to change it to, I don't want to remember. And you have to understand, there's a generation in their 20s and their whole lives have been spent in war, and suddenly everything came out. And they wrote things and told us things on paper, which they would then read aloud, either in English or Arabic, which we would never have heard otherwise. In one of our workshops, a slight young woman wearing a black and white headscarf with a round face and large black eyes, and with just a hint of mascara on the lashes, stood up to read her poem. Her name, I think, was Miriam, and she stood very straight in front of her classmates and read to us with a quiet, unself-conscious dignity. Her pronunciation was excellent, so I have a good memory of what she wrote. She said that she was woken near dawn by her older brother in her bedroom, who had bent down to gently kiss her on the cheek and to ask her if she wanted anything special in the market. And when she looked up at him to tell him no, he said to her very gently that this would be the last time she'd be seeing him. But she was so sleepy, she didn't quite take in what he meant, and a moment later, he was gone.
Later that morning, she wrote, she was in the kitchen having breakfast with her mother. And then their neighbor came in and gave them the news. She wrote that as she heard the news, she felt herself get smaller and disappear. She had no hands, no face, no body to feel with. There was no kitchen, no mother, no her. The neighbor, she wrote, told them about the car accident. She wrote how she remembers her brother's words coming back to her, how gentle he was when he kissed her on the cheek, how he would always bring her special things from the market. And then she sat down, seeming completely self-possessed, except for the sadness that had come into her voice and hung now in the room. No one said anything for a while, as what she hadn't said, didn't need to say, since everyone in her generation already understood, resonated for a few moments. Chris and I looked at each other, but were slower in grasping what it was she'd left out. And then it dawned on us too. Her brother had been a suicide bomber and blown himself up in the car. And this is the last part of this poem I'll read, and then I'll read one more. UH-1N. It's a helicopter. Again, I'm not Brian Williams, believe me. The light-lift Huey rose from the floor of night into the darkness of the brain, where it felt the sullen winds pushing it this way and that, following the current of a thought into a blankness and far-seeingness that, as I rose in the actual chopper, released me to confront the scabbard of Orion's belt. Behind him, the scorpion menaced his exposed heel. But then the rotor roar filled up the space between night sky and ground dark. The imagination slipped down over my eyes like a pair of night vision goggles. What they showed me was myself strapped in, staring down at Baghdad, at one of Saddam's kitsch palaces that looked like something out of the 1,001 Nights, in which only Scheherazade's unending flight of words to keep the Sultan from murdering her can preserve her from his scimitar. How picturesque the imagination envisions the storied world lit up by infrared. How the helicopters retracted doors, letting in the cold night air, refreshed and restored the Sultan in me, while putting under threat of death the insurgent imagination that thinks it can talk its way out of the void it hovers in, its blades rendered an invisible blur as it holds its position in the darkness, intent on the levitating heaviness that allows it to convince itself, suspended in the air, that it's really weightless. And this is the last poem. And it's for my friend, Seamus Heaney. And I was in Libya, and we were in a convoy with a militia, because you have to go everywhere with a militia. This was before the country fell apart. It was just about to fall apart. And I was there with my friend Luigi Ballerini, right there. And anyway, we took this little detour. And for me, everything was a detour because we were in the middle of the desert and there weren't any roads. So they just set the GPS that way and we headed off. So it was all detour as far as I was concerned. Anyway, they took us to a little rock outcropping where there was a Paleolithic engraving of a gazelle. 10,000 years old, tiny, with his head bent down, drinking from what looked like, the outcrop. Its head was down so you could imagine that it was drinking. And Seamus Heaney had written a wonderful poem about going to a cathedral and seeing on the site of the cathedral, Christ standing in zigzag water, which he says were the waters of the soul, during a baptism. And then once I was with Seamus and there was a bomb scare at a conference we were at. All these things kind of came together for me. Called The Waters of the Soul for Seamus Heaney. The chapel's zigzag waters of life, incised in marble, crept up to the saint's knees, his pupilless eyes making him seem blind in his ecstasy. But in that far-off rocky outcrop where we'd stopped between the oasis boreholes and the crossroads cemetery, and where the Italians shot and hung the tribal fighters, then burned them in gasoline, I found you staring back at me from the gazelle's eye, its head carved in profile with that same sidelong stare as when you lounge back in your chair, not really taking notice of the talk swirling through the smoky air. Like an image of the drawn waters of the soul is what you wrote to me. And now I was being scanned by that animal eye and sensing your recoil before the police cars, fuming in the dark, saying quietly, "There's been a bomb scare." But out here in the Sahara, the gazelle, engraved by flint into the softer limestone, lowered its neck to drink from a little stream, sketched in with zigzag lines, mimicking the current, tracing over stone every jagged edge and smoothed off declivity where one day the water would slowly seep away. The wind that afternoon blew sand into the draw that scoured up and down the cliff face, but seemed never to reach the gazelle's delicate tracery. But when I looked closer, I could see a hairline fracture traversing the gazelle's chest that in the next freeze or thaw could crumble. And that 10,000-year-old stare, your endangered look of wary trust, still peers back at me, asking and expecting nothing, full of its own self-sufficiency, shrugging off all my notions of the soul. Thank you.
Well, welcome to the Hunter College Foreign Policy Seminar. I am the author, it appears, of a novel called Amnesia. And I had the curious experience of seeing it reviewed, often very well, occasionally appallingly. And even the people who loved it the most didn't want to say one thing, which is what the book is really built on. And when I tell you what it is, you'll understand why they might not want to say this. And that is that in 1975, the CIA participated in the overthrow of the elected Australian government. Did you know this? Probably not. Am I insane? No, not really. In fact, what do they think about this in Australia? Well, I was there recently, and they're not always nice to me when I go home. You know, you can get pecked to death. But on this occasion, I found myself on television and radio, and no one told me I was a lunatic. So please accept I'm not a lunatic. And we'll just take that bit of the book as given, and I've said now what no one else was prepared to say in reviewing it. It was a spring evening in Washington, D.C., a chilly autumn morning in Melbourne. It was exactly 2200 Greenwich Mean Time when a worm entered the computerized control systems of countless Australian prisons and released the locks in many other places of incarceration, some of which the hacker could not possibly have known existed. Because Australian prison security was, in the year 2010, mostly designed and sold by American corporations, the worm immediately infected 117 US federal correctional facilities, 1,700 prisons, and 3,000 county jails. Wherever it went, it travelled underground in darkness, like a bushfire burning in the roots of trees. Reaching its destination, it announced itself. The corporation is under our control. The angel declares you free. This message and others more elaborate were read in English by warders in Texas, contractors in Afghanistan, Kurdistan, in immigrant detention camps in Australia, in Woomera, black sites in the Kimberley, secret centres of rendition at the American Signals facility near Alice Springs. Sometimes prisoners escaped, sometimes they were shot and killed, bewildered Afghans and Filipinos, an Indonesian teenager wounded by gunfire, a British Muslim dying of dehydration. All these previously unknown individuals were seen on public television wandering on outback roads. The security monitors in Sydney's Villawood facility read, "The angel of the Lord by night opened the prison doors and brought them forth." Now, my former colleagues of the press asked, what does this language tell us about the perpetrator? I didn't give a toss. I was grateful for a story big enough to push me off the front pages where I had already suffered pants on fire. I was spending my days in the Supreme Court of New South Wales paying Nigel Willis QC $500 an hour so I could be sued for defamation. Nigel's billable hours continued to accrue well past the stage when it became clear that he was a fuckwit, and I didn't have a chance in hell. But cheer up, mate, he was betting 3-2 on a successful appeal. That my barrister also owned a racehorse was not really the point. Meanwhile, there was not much for me to do but read the papers. Feds now say Angel is an Aussie worm. Would the defendant like to tell the court why he's reading a newspaper? I'm a journalist, my lad. It's my trade. Attention was then brought to the state of my tweed jacket. Ha ha, my lad. When the court had had its joke, we adjourned for lunch, and I, being unaccompanied on that particular day, took my famously shambolic self across to the Botanical Gardens, where I read the Daily Telegraph down by the rose gardens amongst the horseshit fertiliser. Here I learned that the terrorist, who had been obviously a male Christian fundamentalist, had now become the daughter of a Melbourne actress. The traitor appeared very pale and much younger than her 30 years. Dick Connolly got the photo credit, but his editor had photoshopped her, for in real life she would turn out to be a solid little thing, whose legs were strong and sturdy, not at all like the waif in the Telegraph. She was from Coburg in the north of Melbourne, a flat, forgotten industrial suburb, coincidentally the site of Pentridge Prison. She came to her own arraignment in a black hoodie, slouching, presumably to hide the face that our first homegrown terrorist had a beautiful face. Angel was her handle. Gabby was her name in what I have learned to call Meat World. She was charged as Gabrielle Beaulieu, and I had known her parents long ago. Her mother was the actress Celine Beaulieu, her father Sando Quinn, a Labour Member of Parliament. I returned to my own court depressed, not by the outcome of my case, which was preordained, but by the realization that my life in journalism was being destroyed at the time I might have expected my moment in the sun. I'd published several books, 50 features, 1,000 columns, mainly concerned with the traumatic injury done to my country by our American allies in 1975. While my colleagues leapt to the conclusion that the hacker was concerned simply with freeing boat people from Australian custody, I took the same view as our American allies, that this was an attack on the United States. It was clear to me, straight away, that the events of 1975 had been the first act in this tragedy, and that the angel worm was a retaliation. If Washington was right, this was the story I had spent my whole life preparing for. If the events of 1975 seemed confusing or enigmatic, well, that's exactly my point. They're all part of the great amnesia. In court, I listened to my publisher get a belting from the judge, and I saw his face when he finally understood that he couldn't sell my book, not even as remaindered. Pulp, he said? Yes, including that copy in your hand. Damages were awarded against me for $120,000. Was I insured or not insured? I didn't know. The crowd outside the court was as happy as a hanging day. Felix, Felix, the News International guy shouted. Look this way, Felix. That was Kev Dawson, a cautious little prick who made his living rewriting press releases. Look this way, Felix. What do you think of the verdict, Felix? What I thought was our sole remaining left-wing journalist had been pissed on from a mighty height. And what was my crime? Repeating press releases? No. I had reported a rumour. In the world of grown-ups, a rumour is as much a fact as smoke. To admit the smoke is to fail to communicate the threat to the landscape. What next, Felix? Rob a bank? Shoot myself? Certainly no one would give me the angel story, although I was better equipped, Wired magazine, do take note, better equipped to write it than any of the clever children who would be hired to do the job. But I was, as the judge had been pleased to point out, no longer employable in your former trade. I'd been a leader writer, a columnist, a so-called investigative reporter. I had inhabited the Canberra Press Gallery, where my rumours had a little power. I think Alan Ramsey might have even liked me. For a short period, in the mid-70s, I was the host of Drive Time Radio on the ABC. I was an ageing breadwinner with a ridiculous mortgage. I had therefore been a screenwriter and a weekend novelist. I had written both history and political satire, thrillers, investigative crime. The screen adaptation of my novel, Barbie and the Deadheads, was workshopped at Robert Redford Sundance Institute. But through this, even while bowing and scraping to get seed money from the Australian Film Commission, I remained a socialist and a servant of the truth. I had been sued 98 times before they brought me down with this one, and along the way I had exposed the deeds of Carey Packer and Rupert Murdoch, both old Geelong grammarians, by the way. And this is always a very dangerous occupation for a family man, and apparently terrifying for those who rely on him for succour. As the doors of the mainstream media closed to anyone unworldly enough to write the truth, I still published Low Tech Blog, a newsletter printed on acid paper, which was read by the entire Canberra Press Gallery and all of Parliament besides. Do not ask me how we paid our electricity bills. I worked as a journalist in a country where the flow of information was controlled by 3 corporations. Their ability to manipulate the truth made the right to vote largely meaningless. But I was a journalist and I did my best. In Low Tech Blog, I revealed the Australian press's cowardly reporting of the government lies about the refugees aboard the ill-fated Oolong. I can't comprehend how genuine refugees would throw their children overboard, said our Prime Minister. Once again, like 1975, here was a lie of Goebbelsesque immensity. The Fourth Estate made a whole country believe the refugees were animals and swine. Many think so still. Yet the refugees belonged here. They would have been at home with the best of us. We have a history of courage and endurance, of inventiveness in the face of isolation and mortal threat. At the same time, alas, we have displayed this awful level of cowardice, brown-nosing, criminality, mediocrity, and nest-feathering. Well, I was overweight and out of breath, but I was proud to be sued, reviled, scorned, to be called a loser by the rewriters of press releases. I took comfort from it, which is just as well, because there was no comfort anywhere else. As would be confirmed in the weeks ahead, none of my old mates were going to rescue me from the slow and soul-destroying grind of unemployment. The next chapter is called Two. And if you just laugh a little longer so I can have a sip of water, I'd appreciate that. I'm sorry. Now, a 5-star hotel might seem an unwise venue for a bedraggled, for a bedraggled outcast to lick his wounds. But the Wentworth was favoured by my old mate Woody Wodonga Towns. My dearest friends all exhibit a passionate love of talk and drink. But of this often distinguished crowd, it was Woody Towns who had the grit and the guts. He had attended court every day, although he had first to fly 700 kilometres from Melbourne. Any fight I'd ever had, he was always by my side. And when I'd endured the whacking from the press, I found him where I knew he would be, where he had waited for me on almost every gruesome afternoon, with his meaty body jammed into a small velvet chair in the so-called garden court. The moment he spotted me, he began pouring champagne with his left hand. It was a distinctive pose. The heavy animal leg crossed against his shiny thigh, the right elbow held high to ward off the attentions of an eager waiter. I considered my loyal friend's exposed white calves, his remarkable belt, his thick neck, the high colour in his cheeks, and I thought, not for the first time, that it is Melbourne's talent to produce these extraordinary 18th century figures. In a more contested space, life would compress them, but down south, at the Paris end of Collins Street, there was nothing to stop him expanding to occupy the frame. He was a Gilray engraving, indulgence, opinion, power. Now, by profession, my mate was a property developer, and I presumed that he must sometimes be involved in the questionable dealings of his caste. My wife thought him a repulsive creature, but she never really gave herself a chance to know him. He was both a rich man and a courageous soldier of the left. He was a reliable patron of unpopular causes, and although he was possibly tone deaf, chairman of the South Bank Opera Company. He financially supported at least 2 atonal composers who would otherwise have had to teach high school. He had also bankrolled my own ill-fated play. Woody's language could be abusive. He did occasionally spoil his philanthropy by demanding repayment via small services. But he could be relied upon to physically and legally confront injustice. In a time when the Australian Labor Party was becoming filled with white-collar careerists straight from university, Woody was old school. He did not fear the consequences of belief. "Fuck them all," he said, and ground the champagne bottle down into the ice. And that would be pretty much the content of our conversation. And 3 bottles later, after several rounds of fancy nibbles, he called for the bill, paid with a roll of 50s, got me into a taxi, and gave me a cab charge voucher to sign at the other end. "No surrender," he said, or words to that effect. It was only a short drive across the Anzac Bridge to our house in Rozelle, and here the best part of my life awaited me, my wife, 2 daughters, but In the narrow passageway of our slightly damp terrace house, there stood by poisonous chance 5 cardboard cartons of my book, maliciously delivered that very afternoon. Were these for me to pulp myself? Was that not hilarious? That my puce-faced publisher with his big house in Pimble had gone to the trouble and expense of having boxes sent to my humble door. I was laughing so much I barely managed to carry this burden through the house. Apparently my daughters saw me and cared so little for my distress that they went straight up to watch the Kardashians. Claire must have been somewhere, but I didn't see her yet. I was much more occupied with enacting a court order. I could never light a barbecue. I had no manual skills at all. It was my athletic Claire who handled the electric drill, not me. Naturally, I overcompensated with the firelighters. Did I really enclose a free firelighter in every book? Was that a joke? How would I know? It was not necessarily self-pitying and pathetic that I set my own books on fire, but it was certainly stupid, or at least ill-informed, to add a litre of gas to those feeble flames. I was unprepared for the violent force, the great whoosh that lifted off my eyebrows and caught the lower limbs of our beloved jacaranda. As the flames crawled from the branches to the second-floor extension, I should, people never cease insisting, I should have picked up the garden hose and put it out. Fine. But these dear friends did not see what I saw. I made my judgment. I chose human life before real estate. I rushed up the stairs and snatched the audience from the Kardashians. Yes, my babies were teenagers. Yes, they resisted. But there was no time for explanation, and I had no choice but to treat them roughly. Apparently, I smelled like a cross between a pub and a lawnmower. I rushed them out into the street and left them screaming. I don't know what happened then, but somehow the next-door copywriter stole my girls, and the local fire brigade was soon pushing me aside and dragging their filthy hoses down our hall, and Claire, my wife, my comfort, my lover, my friend, was waiting for me. The next bit should remain private from our kids. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter and Tom. That was absolutely amazing. If you like that, you can buy copies of their latest book and some of the books in the back catalogue at the book selling table in the back. There won't be a book signing, but the first 9 people to buy Peter's new book will get this unique signed bookmark. Oh, and Tom has signed some copies of his latest book as well. So go to the back and feast yourself on the delights that are there. Once again, let's thank Tom and Peter for such a wonderful reading.